Now, let me ask you this. What happens when an arrogant tourist decides to test the limits of a royal guard's patience? What would you do if you spit on someone who's sworn to protect tradition and honor? Well, this is exactly what happened, and the shocking aftermath will leave you questioning everything. Stick around because by the end of this video you'll be thinking twice about respect, discipline, and the consequences of disrespecting authority. Trust me, you won't want to miss the twist. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this video from? Drop a comment below. And if you enjoy this video, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our jaw-dropping stories. It was a brilliant, cloudless morning in one of the world's most iconic royal landmarks, where centuries-old traditions met modern-day tourism. The air was crisp and fresh, and the sun's rays reflected off the palace's grand, golden gates. Towering spires reached toward the heavens, and the intricate carvings on the walls told tales of a rich and storied past. Tourists from every corner of the globe had flocked here, eagerly snapping photos, marveling at the splendor before them. There was an almost electric energy in the crowd, with people laughing, pointing, and chatting, lost in the excitement of the experience. But among them, one individual stood out, not for his enthusiasm but for his sheer arrogance. A man in his late 20s, dressed in flashy clothes that screamed for attention, tight, designer jeans, a brightly patterned shirt, and a gold chain glinting in the sunlight. He strutted confidently through the crowd, completely oblivious to the rules and regulations clearly posted in bold lettering on every nearby sign. No photography with the guards, no loud behavior, no disturbing the peace. He wasn't interested in the palace's history or beauty. All he cared about was the spectacle, his spectacle. As the crowd parted, he pushed his way to the front, his eyes fixed on the royal guard standing immobile at his post. The guard, clad in traditional uniform, his tall hat casting a shadow over his face, stood as the epitome of discipline and unwavering commitment. His eyes were fixed ahead, never shifting, never reacting. A silent sentinel, guarding the royal palace with a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the loud, bustling tourists surrounding him. But today was different. Today this guard would be tested in a way he had never been before. The tourist, now emboldened by the stares of those around him, couldn't resist the urge to push the boundaries. He moved in close to the guard, his phone raised high to capture a photo. "Hey, do you even blink?" he taunted, his voice loud enough for several nearby tourists to hear. A few of his friends snickered, egging him on, urging him to get closer to provoke the guard further. They laughed like it was all a big joke, oblivious to the tension building in the air. The guard didn't flinch. Not a muscle moved. His eyes remained locked on the distant horizon, his face as stone-like as ever. He stood tall, a figure of calm in the midst of chaos. His unyielding composure was exactly what made him such a symbol of discipline. He was trained to remain unaffected, no matter the provocation. But in that moment something shifted in the crowd. A low murmur rippled through the onlookers as they witnessed the scene unfolding. The guard's stillness, his silence, only seemed to make the tourist bolder. And the energy in the air began to change. What was once an innocent exchange now felt like the calm before a storm. The tourists around them stopped talking and the mood grew heavier. Everyone could sense it. The guard hadn't reacted yet, but the line between respect and disrespect had been crossed. Would this arrogant tourist go too far? Could a single act of defiance truly test the resolve of someone trained to never react? The crowd held its collective breath, unsure of what was to come. And then it happened. The tourist, emboldened by the growing tension in the air, stepped even closer to the guard, his every movement deliberate, his smirk widening. The crowd's whispers died down as the air thickened with anticipation. Every eye was fixed on him, everyone wondering how far he would push this. Without warning, he leaned in and with a sudden, defiant motion, he spat. The spit flew through the air and landed with a sickening thud on the polished boots of the royal guard. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The onlookers were stunned. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the audacity of it. Spitting on a royal guard was unheard of. It was a blatant violation of the respect that these figures commanded. The crowd gasped in disbelief, and the noise of their shocked exclamations echoed through the square. "Did he really just do that?" someone whispered. "Is he out of his mind?" Some people stepped back, others stood frozen in place as if they couldn't believe their eyes. A few of them instinctively pulled out their phones, their hands shaking as they began to record the moment. It was as if they knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. But the tourist, completely unfazed, didn't seem to care. He stood there, still smirking, a laugh escaping his lips as if this was just some sort of prank. "What's the matter?" he said, looking around at the shocked crowd. It's just a little spit. His friends chuckled nervously, unsure whether to join in on the laughter or back off from the escalating tension. Yet through all of this, the royal guard remained utterly unmoved. His expression was unreadable. His eyes didn't even flicker as he stood there like a statue, his hands at his sides, his posture as perfect as ever. The spit on his boots, glistening in the sunlight, seemed to be the only sign that anything had happened at all. The silence that followed was almost worse than the incident itself. The tourists, the bystanders, and even the guard were suspended in a strange moment of stillness. The sounds of the crowd faded, and the only thing that seemed to matter was the unsettling calm of the guard's response. He didn't flinch, he didn't shout, he didn't even acknowledge the disrespect. The tension grew unbearable, and the crowd began to murmur again, their words now tinged with confusion and anxiety. What would happen next? Would the guard react? Would he show anger? Would security come rushing in? The air was thick with anticipation, each second feeling like an eternity. Some in the crowd began to edge closer, whispering among themselves, wondering if they had just witnessed something that could not be ignored. Others, unsure of what to do, kept their distance, still recording the event with their phones, not knowing how to process what they had just seen. The tourist, meanwhile, stood proudly in the middle of the crowd, waiting for something, a reprimand, a reaction. He felt untouchable, like he had outwitted the guard. "Isn't he going to do anything?" he muttered, still holding his phone up to capture the moment. "Maybe he's afraid to speak up." What a joke. His friends chuckled again, though their smiles were now hesitant. Something about the scene felt off. It wasn't the usual light-hearted prank or silly moment they had hoped for. The air was too heavy. But the guard, still standing motionless, unyielding and silent, did not react. The moment hung in the balance, and the question on everyone's mind was the same: what will happen next? The guard stood as still as ever, his eyes locked in the same forward stare, as though he had not even noticed the spit on his boots. The only sound breaking the eerie silence was the distant hum of traffic and the hushed murmurs of the crowd that had gathered. To the tourists around him, it felt as though time had frozen. The tourist, who had been so certain of his power in that moment, now seemed to hesitate. His defiance had been met with absolute stillness, and the effect was more unnerving than any confrontation could have been. The guard's unwavering silence held the crowd in suspense, and for a few long moments, it was as though the entire scene was suspended in time. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. The crowd's collective gaze shifted nervously from the tourist to the guard, each individual trying to read the situation. What was going to happen? Why hadn't the guard done anything? Was he going to remain motionless, or was he just waiting for the right moment to act? Some people began whispering among themselves, their words laced with confusion and growing unease. "Why isn't he doing anything?" one person murmured. "He's just standing there like nothing happened." Others shared their doubts aloud. "Does he even care? This is humiliating. How can he just take it?" The air grew thick with tension. For a brief moment, it felt as though the crowd's expectations were set to shatter. This wasn't what they had anticipated. A royal guard, the symbol of discipline and tradition, was supposed to act with authority, to stand tall and confront disrespect head-on. But instead, this guard showed no sign of movement. No sign of anger. Nothing at all. The tourist, still feeling the eyes of the crowd upon him, began to push his luck further. His smirk returned, and with it, the same mocking tone. "What, no reaction?" he taunted, stepping even closer to the guard. "You've got nothing to say, huh? Too disciplined for a little spit? I guess you're just a statue after all." His voice echoed through the square, drawing the attention of even more onlookers. Some of them cringed, while others couldn't help but laugh nervously at the absurdity of the situation. The tourist's words were meant to provoke, to break the guard's silence and expose him as weak in front of everyone. Yet to his surprise, the guard did not flinch. Not a muscle moved. Not a single breath betrayed any emotion. The more the tourist mocked him, the more the guard seemed to grow in his stillness. It wasn't what anyone had expected. The crowd, on the edge of their seats, felt a mix of disbelief and discomfort. Why wasn't the guard responding? Was he too stoic to defend himself? Was this some kind of test of character? It was almost unnerving. The tension in the air was palpable. The crowd waited for the guard to snap, for him to take action, anything that would break this uncomfortable silence. But all they received was an unsettling stillness that only deepened the mystery. What would happen next? Would the guard show restraint, or was there something more at play here than anyone could understand? The seconds stretched on, each one feeling like a lifetime. Just as the murmurs of confusion spread through the crowd, something unexpected happened. A figure in a sharp, well-tailored uniform emerged from the side, moving with a quiet authority that immediately commanded attention. The man was tall, his posture perfect, exuding an air of control. He was a senior officer, someone who held a position of immense respect. As he walked toward the tourist, his every step seemed deliberate, his presence enough to silence the whispers of the crowd. As he approached, the people around them instinctively parted, making way for this figure who seemed to carry the weight of decades of tradition and order. The murmurs died down, replaced by a sense of anticipation. Everyone could feel the shift in the air. Something was about to change. The officer's eyes locked onto the tourist, who now stood a little less confident than before. His bravado had begun to waver under the officer's piercing gaze. The calm, deliberate approach of the officer felt like the calm before a storm. The tourist, still processing the turn of events, took an uncertain step back. "Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" the officer asked, his voice low but unyielding. The tone was calm, but it carried an authority that made it clear this was no ordinary conversation. The tourist, caught off guard, faltered. He had expected a confrontation, perhaps a scolding from the guard, but not this. I was just messing around. "It's no big deal," he stammered, his arrogance now giving way to uncertainty. He glanced around nervously, seeking support from his friends, but they were just as stunned as he was, unsure whether to speak up or remain silent. The officer's gaze didn't waver, his eyes focused solely on the tourist. "This is not just about a small joke," he continued, his voice growing firmer. "You've disrespected the tradition, the guard, and the royal family. There's a reason for their silence." He paused for a moment, letting his words settle in the air. "Their dignity is their strength. And you've attempted to tarnish that?" The tourist blinked, his confidence cracking as the full weight of what he had done started to hit him. He hadn't expected this. This was far from the shouting match or angry confrontation he'd envisioned. This officer wasn't reacting with anger or rage. Instead, he was speaking with a level-headed calmness that only made the situation feel more serious. For the first time, the tourist felt a knot in his stomach. His defiant facade faltered as the officer's words rang true, and the crowd's quiet attention now felt like an unspoken judgment. The officer wasn't raising his voice or pointing fingers. He was letting the situation unfold, but the implications were clear. The officer paused, allowing a silence to hang in the air. The tension was so thick that you could almost hear the thoughts of every person in the crowd as they waited for the next step. The tourist, now visibly uncomfortable, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, unable to maintain his previous swagger. Finally, the officer spoke again, his tone now colder, more decisive. "You will now publicly apologize to the guard for your actions. If you do not, we will have no choice but to take further action." The words were simple, but they carried an undeniable force. The tourist's face flushed a deep shade of red as the full reality of the situation settled in. He wasn't going to just get away with it. There would be consequences. The officer's calm authority had completely shifted the balance of power. The crowd waited, breathless. The tourist, now trapped in the consequences of his own actions, felt the weight of their gazes on him. The laughter and mockery that had once seemed so easy now felt like distant memories. Would he apologize? Or would he dig in his heels even now in front of everyone? The tourist's face drained of color as the gravity of the situation hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't the reaction he had expected at all. Publicly apologize? This wasn't some small reprimand or a momentary laugh from his friends. No, he was being forced into the most humiliating situation of his life, standing in front of a crowd, having to admit his wrongs in the most public way possible. His mind raced. How had things gone so wrong? He had thought he was invincible, just a prank, a moment to be the center of attention. The guards were just statues, right? His actions would get him some laughs, maybe a little scolding, but nothing more. But now the reality was crashing down on him. The pressure was suffocating. The crowd's eyes burned into him, their phones still recording the entire moment, capturing every second of his discomfort. The murmurs from the bystanders had quieted, but the weight of their silent judgment was louder than any words could be. Everyone was watching, waiting for him to do what he had to do. What would he choose? Would he continue defying authority, or would he face the consequences of his actions? He hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether to continue resisting or to back down. His palms were sweaty, his legs shaking. He had never felt so exposed. Finally, with a deep, resigned sigh, the tourist turned slowly toward the royal guard. The moment felt like an eternity. Every eye in the crowd was fixed on him, waiting. The tension in the air was palpable. He swallowed hard, and his voice cracked as he spoke. I'm sorry. "I didn't mean to disrespect you," he stammered. His words were quiet, barely audible, as if he was trying to take back what he had done, but knowing it was too late. The apology felt hollow, and even he knew it was more for the crowd than for the guard standing before him. But the guard who had endured everything in silence, who hadn't reacted once to the spit, the taunts, or the mocking laughter, remained utterly unmoved. His face was still impassive, his eyes locked straight ahead as if nothing had changed. Not even the apology seemed to register. The guard didn't blink, didn't shift his posture, didn't acknowledge the tourist in any way. It was as though the apology wasn't enough to erase the disrespect he had shown. The guard's silence, his complete lack of response, sent a wave of discomfort through the crowd. The tourist stood there, waiting for something, anything, an indication that the apology had been accepted, that this ordeal might be over. But nothing happened. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The air, thick with tension, hung heavy over them. And the crowd was waiting too, as if holding its breath. The tourist, now completely on edge, looked around at the faces in the crowd, some sympathetic, others judgmental. The officer who had spoken earlier stood silently in the background, his expression unreadable, but his presence alone reinforced the seriousness of the situation. The silence from the guard was deafening. And that, in itself, was the twist. The guard had not spoken, had not even acknowledged the apology, because there was something more at play here than just the words of the tourist. For the first time, the tourist felt the full weight of his actions. Not just the spit, but the humiliation he had brought upon himself. This wasn't a matter of getting away with it or making a joke. The guard's silence was an overwhelming statement. The apology, however sincere, wasn't enough to undo what had been done. The disrespect wasn't something that could simply be washed away by a few empty words. The tourist took a step back, realizing for the first time that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And just like that, the crowd's murmur began again, this time with a different tone. Some had started to feel pity for the tourist, while others felt a deep sense of justice. But everyone was left with the same question: what comes next? The story didn't end there. As the crowd dispersed and the royal guard returned to his post, the incident was far from over. What had started as a single moment of disrespect was now becoming something much bigger. The video footage, capturing the entire exchange from the spit on the guard's boots to the tourist's eventual apology, began to spread like wildfire across social media. Within hours, millions had viewed it. Every corner of the internet seemed to be buzzing with debate. Hashtags like #RespectTheGuard and #SilentStrength trended worldwide, and soon the incident had become the topic of conversation for everyone. Opinions were divided. Some hailed the guard's composed silence as a model of dignity and restraint. To them, his unshakable calm in the face of disrespect was a powerful statement of the importance of respect and the strength that came with discipline. They argued that the tourist had gotten off lightly, and that something more severe should have been done to teach him a lesson. But then there were others, those who sympathized with the tourist, questioning whether the punishment was too harsh. It was just a joke, wasn't it? They reasoned. Maybe the guard should have shown some mercy. After all, it was just a moment of thoughtlessness. A little spit shouldn't warrant this much drama. News outlets quickly picked up on the story. The headlines ranged from "Tourist crosses the line with royal guard" to "The silent hero," how one guard took the high road in the face of disrespect. The incident had caught the attention of news networks across the globe, and the royal guard was soon being lauded for his professionalism. Meanwhile, the tourist, who had once felt like the center of attention for all the wrong reasons, was now at the center of a media firestorm. In a desperate attempt to salvage what was left of his reputation, the tourist uploaded a tearful video to his social media accounts. The video showed him sitting in front of a plain background, his face flushed with embarrassment. His voice wavered as he spoke, his eyes occasionally darting off camera, clearly struggling to convey his sincerity. I just want to apologize for what happened," he said, his voice breaking. "I was wrong. What I did wasn't funny, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I thought it would be a joke, a prank, but I now realize how disrespectful and foolish I was." He paused, wiping his eyes before continuing. "I've learned a valuable lesson about respect. Not just for the guard, but for everyone in authority, and for traditions I never really understood. I want to do better." It was a humble apology, but it wasn't enough to erase the damage he had done. The video quickly went viral as well, though the reactions were mixed. Some praised his courage in admitting his mistake, while others criticized him for trying to redeem himself in front of the cameras, claiming that his apology wasn't genuine but rather an attempt to regain lost social capital. The story had moved beyond just the tourist. It had become a symbol of something larger. Public decorum, the importance of discipline, and the consequences of taking authority for granted. For many, the incident highlighted the fine line between humor and disrespect, between freedom and responsibility. The guard's silent response had become a metaphor for resilience in the face of adversity, and it resonated with people from all walks of life. As for the tourist, the apology video couldn't undo the viral spread of his actions. The comment sections on his social media posts were flooded with both praise and condemnation. The overwhelming attention forced him to reckon with his behavior in ways he hadn't anticipated. The guard, however, remained a figure of quiet strength. His duty was done. He had never sought attention or recognition. He had only performed his role with the same dignity he always had. In the aftermath, while the world debated the incident, the guard continued his post as immovable and stoic as ever. He didn't need to say anything to be understood. His silence had spoken volumes. The incident became a reminder to the public. Sometimes the most powerful statement is the one you don't make. And for the tourist, it was a lesson he would never forget. As the incident continued to dominate social media and the news cycle, one thing became clear: the story was far from over. While the world debated and dissected every moment, the royal guard remained exactly as he had been before, silent, still, and unwavering. He had become the epitome of discipline and dignity, his composure in the face of such a brazen act of disrespect inspiring people across the globe. What was it that made him so composed? What allowed him to remain unshaken, even when faced with the most public of humiliations? Was it simply his training, or was there something deeper, something more intrinsic, that guided his behavior? The guard's silence became a powerful lesson for all who witnessed the incident. His calmness was not a sign of weakness, but rather a demonstration of the power of restraint. In a world where reactions are often instant, emotional, and driven by impulse, the guard's quiet dignity showed us that true strength lies not in how loudly we respond, but in how calmly we stand our ground. He taught us that sometimes silence can speak volumes. It's not the loudest voices that make the strongest impact, but the ones that remain composed in the face of adversity. As for the tourist, did he truly learn a lesson, or was this just another embarrassing moment that would fade with time? The tearful apology he uploaded seemed genuine, but was it? Could a single video undo the harm he had caused? Or would this incident remain just another chapter in his long list of reckless acts, soon forgotten as he moved on to the next thrill? Only time would tell whether this experience would truly change him or if it would fade into the background of his life, as so many viral moments do. The officer's final words still echoed in the minds of all who witnessed the confrontation. True strength is in control, not in reaction. This simple yet profound statement captured the essence of what had unfolded. The tourist's attempt to provoke a reaction had failed because the guard did not fall into the trap. Instead, he remained in control, showing that true power lies not in our reactions, but in our ability to maintain our composure, even when the world seems to demand a response. So what do you think? Was the punishment fair? Should the tourist have faced even harsher consequences, or did the public apology suffice? Was the guard's silence the ultimate act of strength, or should he have done more to hold the tourist accountable? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinion matters. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more thought-provoking stories like this one. If you were in the same situation, what would you have done? Comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that will leave you speechless.